I love Burn the Haystack because I'm a deep thinker and I like to challenge old traditions to make way for a brighter future. That's also why I chose to get my degree from Avondale University College. With a thriving community of believers, I was able to kickstart my career and grow my faith at the same time. Business, arts, teaching, nursing, or ministry. Called to make a difference? Called to be at Avondale.
Welcome back to Burn the Haystack with Josh and Jesse.
I'm Jesse.
And I'm Josh.
And this is a show all about saving the best and burning the rest.
Absolutely, but we are not alone today. We have a friend. Everybody, please say hi to Catalina. Hello.
Hello, thanks for having me. I must say that intro, it just always makes me smile. And to be able to watch you guys with me on the screen, it's like, wow, hello.
That's so funny.
It was very flattering.
It's like muscle memory now.
My bucket list, I can tick it off.
Oh, thank you. That's very nice. Yeah, it's like, I don't know. I've done it so many times. It just feels like total muscle memory now. Just like click in and I don't even think about what I'm saying. But anyway, well, hey, it's great to have you. Catalina Arevalo or Arevalo. Yes. We couldn't decide before. None of us could decide, which I find kind of funny. Before we started. But I'm sure you guys have seen her around. She is the founder of the CONNECTED Adventist podcast, which is a great podcast, very encouraging. Enjoy listening to it. And also, more recently, the creator of the YouTube channel SDA Insider.
Ooh.
So,
yes.
Amazing. And now even a TikToker, I believe.
Yeah.
Really? I did not know this.
Well, you found out now. Yes, so I am a TikToker. TikToker. I don't even know what the term for me is.
I was about to say, I don't know how to say it, but what is it that you TikTok?
What ticks do you talk?
Just the ones that tick. Just those ones.
True.
All right. Dad joke quota completely filled for the entire episode. All right.
I thought we'd just go to the next level. Totally. Like in case it wasn't lame enough, let's just go further. But basically decided I wanted to go. I must say I was impressed by I don't know what his last name is. I've just missed it. But Pastor Kevin. So he does the chai TikTok videos.
Yes.
So there's a bit of stuff going around from him at the moment. And after I saw just how powerful, I guess digital media, digital ministry is just so powerful in spreading any message. And after listening to his story, I'm like, let me use that for the gospel as well. So I decided that I wanted to start a channel a little bit about what I'm studying, but as well just about my own personal experiences, and then trying to make it gospelish at the end to sort of make a little bit of a connection with some spiritual ideas and spiritual concepts. So it's I don't even know what my name, like, is it like a handle on TikTok? I don't username. Username is living.j, which is for living with Jesus, but we're just going to be subtle like that and make it living with J.
Living with J. I love it. Well,
cool. I would follow you, but I've taken a break from TikTok for a while.
Yeah.
Maybe permanently. I don't know. I just got a bit too into it. Anyway, that's me. That's a whole other story. But anyway, I'm glad. I love seeing people getting into all different digital mediums. So that's exciting.
But I'm the same. I had to I almost feel like I needed to write like a law book for TikTok for myself because I know.
Never will I
know
ever.
my personality.
Yeah.
It's so addictive as well.
100 videos later, I'm like, where did that hour just go of my life? So
seriously.
I have to be very, very disciplined with my TikTok.
Okay, so Kat, if people are not aware of any of the projects that you're involved with or founded, or all of them you founded, what would you tell people about yourself and the sort of content that you create. Who is Catalina Arevalo? Who is she?
So I this is what I say within like Christian circles. I say that I'm an entrepreneur for the gospel. I'm willing to give everything a go. I've just always been someone that I don't care to fail, and I'm willing to learn. So yeah, I may not be any good at any of the things that I do, but I'm willing to give it a go. And, I think with any entrepreneur in business, they have many failures before they make it in terms of what we would, classify as success, or, they've reached their million or their billion or whatever it is. And I have that same sort of mindset for anything that I do in terms of my ministries. I just want to make sure that I am putting myself in positions where I can see where God really wants to bless. And if that's through TikTok, let it be. And if it's something else, I'll continue trying until I know that God has me exactly where he wants me and the ministry that he wants me to be in. So yeah, my motto in life is anything for the gospel till I give my last breath. And you could say I have no shame. Some people are like, oh, you're just so confident. I'm like, it's actually not confidence. I just don't care to be embarrassed, and I don't care to stuff up. And I'm willing to keep going until I feel like, yeah, this is where God is really wanting me to be. So that's pretty much, yeah. I
think that's so key, because like part of that entrepreneurial thing, it has to be that no fear of failure, because most people that I know who are like really, they have an idea, they often will never try it. I mean, I'm speaking about myself here as well. You won't try it because what if it sucks? What if it doesn't pan out? What if it fails? But not having that fear of failure is so cool. And I think it really speaks to what you've created over a very short span of time. Correct me if I'm wrong. CONNECTED Adventist, did you start that last year or the year before?
So it'll be 2 years in November.
2 years in November.
Wow.
Yeah. It feels like just the other day that it started, and all the Adventist podcasts started. Because I mean, when Josh and I started Burn the Haystack, there was like nothing. We were kind of like, I don't know if this is like even a thing. And then suddenly all these things started sprouting. And we're like, oh, I guess that everybody else kind of had the same idea at the same time. But that's cool. That's so cool. Could you tell us a little bit about CONNECTED Adventist? And then I also want to hear about SDA Insider.
Yeah. So the podcast was basically, I mean, if I'm truly like completely honest with you, I always wanted to go into digital space, but it was in the too hard basket. I knew there were different things that I could use, either be a YouTube channel. I used my social media, my Facebook account for quite a bit of like personal outreach, but I wanted to get into something that was a bit more outreach type on other platforms, but it just seemed a bit too hard. And I just didn't have the motivation to really have to learn software and have to learn how to do things. So I sort of left it for quite a while and was involved in another ministry, which is about community service and establishing community service in local churches. So I was doing quite a bit of that. And then, November 2 years ago, I remember listening to some Oz Table Talks podcast and they did an interview with Justin Coe, I think it is. I always say Q, but it's Coe, I think. And he talked about, in that interview, he's like, you know what, I've got a YouTube channel, but if I had to start again, or if I had to choose another option, he's like, I'd go into podcasting. And I thought, what, this guy, he's like so well known within like the YouTube space for being like a Christian YouTuber that I was like, why podcasting? And I thought, oh, you know what, that's probably easiest. Let me start there. So that's when the podcast started. But I must say that the big motivator that got me through into getting and actually doing something with the podcast was the fact that I was going through a lot of stuff at that time. And I'm the type of person, when I go through stuff, my mind is literal torment, and it doesn't switch off unless I'm really proactive about thinking about things, doing things, or like I just need to be busy in order for me to not deal with that.
Wow.
So that's basically when I'm like, all right, let me do a podcast, because then at least I can be thinking about the podcast instead of the stuff that's going on. And it was just a really good distraction. And so I think it was the combination of, I need a distraction, I need something else to keep me busier, and just listening to Justin, that I was like, okay, let's do it. And then that was it. So then I started the podcast, and I felt really impressed just to share my journey. For those who don't know me or don't know my spiritual walk, I came from an extremely conservative Seventh-day Adventist faith. And this was not through family. I became a Seventh-day Adventist, or at least I started attending the Seventh-day Adventist church when I was 14. And it was just, I just went to church. It was just that kind of thing. But then at around the age of 21, I'd been married for 2 years, and stuff happened in life, and I decided, you know what, we're just going to do this for real, and we're going to be serious Christians, and we're going to be like dedicated to our Lord. And we just started hanging around with people who were from the extremely conservative end of Adventism. And that basically was the direction that we took. And when I started the podcast, I had been wrestling with a lot of ideas and things that I was holding onto, that I was like, you know what, I don't know how legit all this stuff is in terms of what is really presented throughout the Bible and where God wants me as an individual. And so as I wrestled through a lot of that stuff, I thought, you know what, I really want to share on my podcast what it looked like to go from extremely conservative, where I didn't own a pair of pants, I didn't own shirts that were shorter than like 3/4 length, so they all went past my elbow. And that's just to give you an idea of that's the type of Adventist that we were. And I wanted to share that journey and how God was bringing me to where he wanted me to be, rather than these, I call them like trends we have within Adventism, and how I was going to better represent Christ through my own personal experience. So that's pretty much the podcast.
Wow.
Yeah, I one thing I've really appreciated about your podcast is you're very like, I mean, some episodes you're quite raw, which I really appreciate, but you're just very open about a journey, and it's cool to see your journey. I listened to one of yours recently about swimming on Sabbath, and I found it just funny, like the journey, like you can really hear the journey in the story as you tell it, and I think it's cool. I really appreciate people just sharing, like not necessarily an expert, in things, but just, hey, here's the journey that I'm on, and maybe it'll be helpful to you. I'd actually like to see that in more, and I think there are so many mediums in which you can do that. I think it's a really great thing that a lot of people would probably benefit from, and I think it also helps you grow when you have an opportunity to talk about it. This is what Jesse and I are doing this podcast. I think we've grown a lot just in the conversations we've been forced to have because of the medium that we're in. Yeah. And so maybe you felt the same.
Yeah. And it's been the same. And I think just the community that I have built through the transparency, and I've always been like that. Like sometimes people are like, how did you feel about, talking about masturbation? I'm like I have no issue, because I've just always seen my walk as I'm not the only one. Yeah. And I've always been like, if I can share my experience with someone, with the possibility of, making a fool out of myself or being extremely embarrassed, or people looking at me in a certain type of way because now they know certain stuff about me, it just doesn't bother me. Like I don't care. From a very early age, I had to stand for my faith against my family, because I was the only Adventist in my family. And I remember standing up for very Seventh-day Adventist beliefs or biblical beliefs. And my parents are like, don't you just want to go like smoke some weed? Like, do you want to get drunk? Like, I'll go. Like I had my parents trying to do this and like push me to do certain things. So from 14, I was like, I don't care what anyone says or thinks about me. And I do. Like people, I don't want to give this idea that I'm insensitive to anything like that. It does still affect me. But in terms of using my story to help someone, I have no shame. Like I'm willing to share.
Yeah, that's good. And probably something that's been often missing from our church. I think a lot of people, particularly you think about showing up to church on Sabbath, and it's very show your best, hide the rest kind of thing.
Yes.
And that's as well the kind of Instagram culture we live in too. So it's probably something that's missing that a lot of people, I don't know, we could definitely use more of, I think. From a range of perspectives. So
I am interested, Kat, if you could kind of describe where you are now versus where you were 2 years ago. How would you describe sort of you, like in terms of when you first started, who is Are you the same cat? Are you a different cat? What do you think?
I definitely say I've changed. I will always say, though, that even within my very conservative ideas of Christianity, and I always say this, I always give this disclaimer, like, I may not be completely accurate in my perception of this, but I was never the type of person that needed to force people to be like me, dress like me, think like me, eat like me, read like me, watch like me. I never gave that, or I feel I never was intentional about converting people to my conservative beliefs. When someone did ask me a question, I would always share with them why I was where I am. And I feel I'm still the same. If someone asks me, hey, why do you wear skirts, that are short now, when I used to not own one skirt? I did not own one skirt that was shorter than ankle length. Like there was nothing that was shorter than that. I will tell you why if you ask. And I think I'm still the same in terms of my belief systems, in terms of where I am. I think probably the greatest thing that I have learned in the last 2 years, I think, is one, our heart is extremely deceitful and it is wicked. I know from my own personal journey in the past 2 years, I have realized the extent of where my heart can go if I choose to let go of God. And I don't think I've ever seen my heart in that place. I've never seen it through that lens because life's circumstances never allowed for it to look, for me to see through that lens. But that's probably one thing. I'm very much aware of who I am as a person and a person in this great controversy. But in amongst that, I think God has just really given me such a greater clarity of who he is. He's opened my eyes to see him and experience him in a way that I had never experienced had I not seen the condition of my heart, had I not seen of what I was capable as a human without Christ. I think now I can see just the goodness of God in the light of who I am. So that's probably the biggest things that have changed.
Wow.
That's cool.
Crazy.
Yeah. Man, I could just listen to that all day. All right. Really good. Hey, do you want to tell us a little bit about SDA Insider and what that's all about?
So SDA Insider, again, give my credit to Justin Coe. He basically did a workshop. We went to digital discipleship in the Gold Coast, and I met you guys there and realized how tall you guys were. I'm like, wow, you don't realize people's heights when you see them on screens or when you only hear their voice. So we were there and he gave a presentation, and I remember I was wanting to go into YouTube. I felt comfortable hearing my voice on a podcast, and I felt I could probably now feel comfortable with people looking at me through a camera and through a screen. So I was trying to work out what I was going to do with my channel, the direction I wanted to go. So I initially felt impressed to do just a series on the 28 fundamental beliefs of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. So I recorded about 15 videos of that, and then went to digital discipleship. And then I felt like, who am I to even do this thing? I was so discouraged because they were just such talented, creative people at that conference, and people who just did things properly. They had the skills, they had the training, they've gone to like uni, and they have degrees for this kind of stuff. And then I'm like, who am I? Like, really? So I came out discouraged. But Justin's Q, in his workshop, he talked about the fact that if you do a YouTube search or a Google search about the Seventh-day Adventist Church, the majority of the content that is on there is actually really negative about the Seventh-day Adventist Church. There's very little positive results when we search about our church. Yeah. And he said that, part of his mission for his YouTube channel was to be like a positive representation of Adventism. And that's when I prayed about it a lot, and I was like, God, you know what? Maybe just let me see what I should do. And I just felt impressed to just Google and YouTube the most popular asked questions about the Seventh-day Adventist Church, and I just give a practical, short, like 5 to 10 minute answer, and I just clarify what the Adventist Church really looks like. So I called it the SDA Insider because I wanted it to be like a little like conspiracy theory, like someone, they're exposing some of that. So I did want to trap people with that kind of idea. But it literally is me just sitting right here. This is my backdrop, and I just answer their questions. So I've done a YouTube video on do Adventists drink coffee, why Adventists don't eat meat, who is Ellen White, and some of those. Seventh-day Adventist Mormons. So I'm about to do one. Seventh-day Adventist Jehovah's Witnesses. So just basically answering, are we or aren't we, or why do we believe certain things and why don't we?
Yeah. That's really cool.
Yeah, which is really good for, like, as far as I know about YouTube algorithms and stuff, well, it's the second biggest search engine in the world. So doing stuff based off a question like that is very effective.
Yes.
So really good. Yeah, really good leaning into the platform there. Very impressed, Kat. Yeah.
Yes, I did do quite a bit of research. So God didn't just put it on my mind. But I did do a lot of research as to how to word questions the best, how to make my thumbnails really clickbait. So my thumbnails are a lot more clickbait than the titles. The titles are actually more an explanation, but And
just to, I guess, move along in the roller coaster television series that is the life of Kat, you also have taken another leap recently-ish into a new career pathway. You want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So last year I decided I was going to go into full-time study, and I am currently studying for a Bachelor of Social Work and Human Behavioral Science. So I'm in my second trimester of that. And like I was telling you guys, I love it. I'm like, I get to do this for 6 hours a day. It's great.
That's so cool.
Do you have a local university that you're going to, or are you doing it online?
No, so it's online through Griffith University, but I do get to go into our local university in Bundaberg, which is Central Queensland University. Because we're in a rural area, they allow online students to go onto their library, so I'm able to use their premises. So I just drop the girls off at school and then go there and
That's
pick them up and we're done for the day.
And for all of our overseas listeners, if you're ever in Australia and you see a small bottle labelled Bundaberg ginger beer, it is the best ginger beer ever. So that's one of the many great things to come out of Bundaberg.
I was going to make a joke about you paying for your uni fees through rum or ginger beer, whether that was an acceptable currency or not.
Or sugar.
There's a lot of sugar in that. That's awesome.
Yeah. So I'm actually an hour out from Bundaberg. So I drive an hour in every morning and an hour back. So.
Wow.
Living in tiny New Zealand, I cannot imagine doing that sort of commute anymore. I think it's so funny here. Everywhere, to drive anywhere is like 10, 15 minutes, at least where I'm living.
Where you are, yeah.
Yeah,
a little bit more for me, but still, like, the thought, I mean, I remember I used to just casually drive from Melbourne to Sydney for a weekend. You know, that's like a 10-hour drive. I can't even imagine doing that anymore. Like, it's so crazy to me, but that's just what life is like.
Yeah.
So Bundaberg is really tiny as well. So my university is on the other side of Bundaberg and the girls' school is on the opposite end.
Oh.
So I leave at 3:00, which is like rush hour with school pickups. I leave my uni at 3:00 and I've made it to the girls' school by 3:15.
Wow.
And
nice.
It works out really well because they're like, don't pick us early because we like to play with all the kids after school. So it takes me 15 minutes in like rush school pickup time to get over to them.
That's awesome.
Crazy.
That's awesome. So in particular, with your social work degree that you're doing, you were talking to us a little bit beforehand about the idea of privilege and all that sort of stuff. So do you want to lead us in? Because we're kind of getting to this point. Just so everybody knows, Kat asked us to do some homework. So I just want to let everybody know that usually when we have a podcast guest, we send them questions for them to answer. In this case, Kat sent us questions to answer. So I feel like this is kind of like a hostile takeover almost. But do you want to explain to us exactly where your head's at? And I think that's going to lead into this very interesting discussion that we're going to have.
Okay, I will. So when I was invited by both of you to jump on and come and join you for the podcast, you sort of asked, hey, what would you like to discuss? And I must say, like, my social work stuff is just something I'm really excited about. I think it's just because it has really I think it just has done a lot of stuff in my own personal head and my own personal way of thinking that I'm like, let me just share this wherever I can. And one of the things that I did want to talk about was this idea of privilege. And the reason why I wanted to speak to, and I will honestly tell you, when I sit through my lectures, I'm writing down notes, and my notes are like, and Jesus did that. And then, it'll talk about like marginalized communities. And I'm like, the lepers and the Gentiles were that. Like, I always tie it back to biblical ideas and my biblical worldview. So I wanted to discuss that a little bit, and I guess in the context of Christianity, in the context of Adventism. But in order for us to really have that discussion, we have to be able to look at some areas of our lives that play into these like power structures or these structures that mean justice. And I could have asked you on the spot, hey, are there any situations where you guys have experiences? But it just doesn't. I think if I put you on the spot while we're recording, it wouldn't have been as thought through as if I had have sent you the questions. So I was like, well, in order to have this conversation in the best way and in the best light, it was probably best to send you the questions off before. So I wanted to ask you 2 situations, or 1 situation, however many you want to share, of where you have felt that you have experienced privilege. Now, privilege, based on what I have been learning through my course, is basically unearned or unmerited benefit or advantage over another person, another group, or an organization. And then I asked you, hey, have you ever felt oppression? And oppression is basically not being heard, not being represented, or not having an equal value or representation either through race, through culture, or belief. So do you want to share your privilege situations or scenarios?
No. No, I don't know. I personally really struggle. Like, I don't know, both of these questions, I felt like, I don't know if I've ever really felt super like privileged, but some people listening to this might be like, well, you're just blind, you haven't seen it or whatever. But I don't know. I was honestly really thinking hard about it. I thought of one. And I was thinking about, like, it was when I was talking to a colleague in ministry who is a woman. And she shared to me about her journey and what she had to do in her internship and what she had to do to get picked up and get an internship and everything and in her employment. And it sounded way more intense than what I've had to do. And I don't think it was just because I don't think it's because she was in a different internship. I think quite often, and like when I've talked to other guys and other people in ministry, generally, I've felt like because I'm a guy, I've had an easier time getting my foot in the door with ministry and doing ministry in general. Like there are certain churches where women can't preach, but I can go and preach. And some people don't like me preaching because I have long hair and whatever, but you know what I mean? Like I've felt like that's probably the biggest one for me, that I've actually felt like I've had privilege just because I'm a male in ministry compared to a female, which I don't like.
That's a valid one. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's very present. We can definitely see that one.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
And what about you, Jesse?
Yeah. I went to, so a few years ago, I was evicted. Karina and I, my wife and I, were evicted from our rental because the owner wanted to move in. And so we were scrambling to looking for a new place to rent. And I remember going to an open home for a rental with the agent and with a few other prospective renters. And I didn't think about this. This is in New Zealand, right? So I was there with 3 other people. 2 of those people were Pacifica. And one of those other people was, I still remember him, a skinny, tall guy with a goatee and a really scraggly singlet. And when you kind of see people and you kind of make a judgment call about their socioeconomic position based on what they're wearing, based on the way they speak, etc. I remember being there with the real estate agent, who was this quite prim, proper, middle-aged lady. And there were these 2 Pacifica people who were both looking at the house, and this other guy who apparently owned a cat, and he was talking about whether it'd be okay to have the cat in the property. And there I was in not nice clothes, but by comparison, I'm a church pastor. My wife is a school teacher. I was wearing a nice sweater and whatever. You know, I was driving an okay middle of the road Mazda 3. The other people were turning up in these beat up 90s Corollas, and, you know, somebody had something. And I very distinctly remember thinking, I think I'm going to get this rental based on who these other people are. And sure enough, like a day later, the lady called up, the real estate agent called up saying, yep, you're in. You are the most, let's say, appropriate person to rent this house or whatever. And I remember initially thinking, yes, you know, God's really taking care of me. Praise God. We were really struggling to look for a place. But then I thought, did I really deserve that place based on who I was, based on who else potentially could have gotten the place? And I remember feeling kind of dirty about it. Like I didn't deserve it, but apparently I did. Yeah. So that was one of the moments where I really understood sort of white privilege without, you know, the cliche of white privilege, but I really understood it then. Yeah.
And the reason why it's really important to have, like, just really think these situations through. So in our course, we have, for some courses, we have 400 students. For others, we have 500 students. Wow. And this is how we begin our course. Like, these are first year subjects where we're told to sit down and think about our privilege and think about our oppression and how it is lived out, how it is observed, and the evidence that we have for it. And the reason why they do that, and I will tell you, like, I see our chat. So we have the lecture, you know, where they've got the lecture screens on the session. And then you see the chat on the side where all the students are just chatting away about the topic, whatever. And I have seen so many of them that are like, I'm not privileged. I've never experienced privilege. And then you have other people who are like, I've been so oppressed. All I've ever experienced in my life is oppression. And as we continue, you know, week 3, week 4, everyone is like, I never realized I was so privileged.
Wow.
And then you have people that are like, oh, I have been oppressed my whole life. I just thought that's how society functioned. I didn't realize that the way I get treated, the way people respond to me, that is actually a form of oppression. So the reason why we want to discuss this topic, and you know, our lecturers are very intentional about making us aware of privilege before we're aware of oppression, was because then we can see how these two power structures are always together. In order for me to experience privilege, someone has to experience oppression. Now, taking it back to biblical, like, ideologies and biblical teachings, privilege in itself is not something that is evil. Israel experienced an abundance of privilege that God gave to them. So privilege, and I guess in all sense, whether it's through race, whether it's through gender, whether it's, you know, whatever, we can see that there are reasons for certain things, and it actually isn't evil in itself. It's how we use that privilege and the impact that it has on those that are the inferior or the less dominant group. And because of that, then we have this idea of power structures, then we have people that abuse their privileges, and then we have oppression of different people. So in its sense, we have to understand that society runs through social structures that impact how we interact with other people. And that's why it's called sociology. We're looking at how societies function. And then there's theorists who have set up, oh, well, you know, this is functionalism, and we need to have systems of privilege and oppression in order to function. We need to have a president who then tells, you know, the people underneath them how to function, and the people underneath them tell. So we need to have that hierarchy. But then we have this other thing, which is called conflict theory, which says, no, if we didn't have those power structures, if we didn't have those systems, then everyone would be the same. Everyone would be equal, and we wouldn't have this concept of oppressing another person, because we need to do that in order to have what we have. And it gets into like capitalism and socialism and all that sort of stuff, but we're not going to go there. But yes, privileges are there, and ultimately we have to have a look at what is our part in that specific area, and how does that influence us as Christians, and even within the church space. I look at all this stuff and I see how much of it is present in our churches. I mean, I have to admit, there is a privilege that I'm experiencing right now because I am one of your guests. Why was I picked over someone else? Why didn't someone else who maybe has graduated from their degree and have probably a ton more experience than me? But there's a privilege that's attached to me because I'm already a podcaster. We connected through the fact that I am a podcaster. That's the only way you found out about me. So there's privileges and there's benefits that aren't necessarily harmful, but we want to have a look at the reasons why some privileges do result in oppression and result in, the mistreatment of another human being. So what were your examples of oppression?
Yeah, Jesse, do you want to go first this time?
Yeah, sure. Actually, I've got an oppression. I've been oppressed. And I've been privileged for exactly the same thing, which I find quite interesting. So I'll quickly touch on the privilege side. So 2 years ago, I was selected by a New Zealand Pacific Union committee to be a delegate for the General Conference World Session this year, which of course didn't end up happening. But I was a bit confused as to why I was selected. And I eventually figured out that I was selected because of my age, because in the demographic makeup of our union, they needed certain people who fit a certain age bill. And I was selected based on that, not because of merit or because I was selected because they thought, Jesse is going to be the best representation of our union, but simply because of my age. And young pastor sort of thing. So, but then to flip it on the other side, and this is a bit of a tongue-in-cheek oppression. This is not entirely serious, but so in my current region, I am the youngest pastor by about 40 years. 40 years, right? Before I was here, Josh lived in my region. He was about the same. And amongst my colleagues, I always feel like my voice is the one that's never heard because I'm a young whippersnapper sort of thing. So it's not oppression in the sense of a deep sort of injustice. Like I'm being, the boot of the hierarchy is on my neck or anything like that. But I definitely feel in certain arenas, my age and my demographic, my gender, my profession, they stack up to disproportionately advantage me. But in other arenas, it kind of disproportionately disadvantages me at the same time, which is a very strange dynamic to live within. Also, the fact that I'm an Australian living in New Zealand, and many New Zealanders are quite open about their disdain for Australia.
And we do the same.
Yes, exactly. I remember being an Aussie living in New Zealand, mocking the Kiwi accent all the time. And now that script has been flipped on me. So it's a very strange thing. Yeah.
And that's really valid, even though you said, it's not like maybe a severe oppression that you face. But so in order for us to have oppression, there has to be a privilege, and that privilege is associated to that oppression. So there are 7 levels of privilege, and one of those privilege is actually age. So there is a privilege of age in wherever you find yourself. So if I go and play lawn bowls, there is going to be a privilege of age where the seniors are going to look at me and they'll be like, you young one, what are you doing over here? Yeah. And then it would be the reverse. If there was like an elderly person that came and joined, came to the skate park, they would get treated a certain type of way. So there is a discrimination that is present as a result of ageism. There's health and ability, which comes to people that have disabilities. So there is also a privilege that I have that I can go anywhere. I can go on a hiking track. I can go and see a lookout, and I don't have to think about the fact, can I climb those steps? Can my wheelchair fit in that? So there's different levels. Education is another one, which often comes to this idea of, well, if you have a degree, then you can, take that position or you can have that role, depending on where you've also studied. So some universities, and I've realized that now as I'm in university, some universities are valued more than other universities. So there's a privilege that comes attached to me having a degree and having a degree in one of the more common more popular universities. There's another privilege, which is the privilege of professionalism. How much experience do you have, within the church context? How many baptisms do you have? How many churches have you planted? What's your church membership? So that's another level of privilege. The other one is social economic status. So, hey, how wealthy are you? We have a way of discriminating against people based on, what are they wearing? What car do they own? What suburb do they live in? What kind of a house they have? And then the last one is, there's two more. So sexuality and orientation, again, is a privilege. And then the last one is race and origin. So you'll be surprised that in a lot of situations where we feel either oppression or privilege, they fall into those distinct categories that have been identified. So yeah, it's still very valid, and it's very true, like that your experience would look like that. Josh, what about you?
Yeah, I would say the times when I've felt more on the oppressed side was probably, I don't know, it's probably more around political stuff, I think. I think particularly of some friends were having a discussion about abortion recently, and I don't want to get into that on this podcast at all right now, but I went to go and just say something. It didn't matter what my view was, whether I was pro or against, but they instantly just cut me off and said, no, you can't comment on this because you're a male, And I thought, wait, I can't even have an opinion or share an opinion just because I'm male. I don't know. At that time I felt like, man, that's so weird that, like, to me, this is a big thing and I can't even speak to it because of my gender. I don't know if that's right or wrong, whatever, but, I just I remember the feeling at the time. And the same with when we had the vote on the plebiscite in Australia on gay marriage. I just felt like, and again, whatever my views are, it doesn't matter, but I did feel like there were views that couldn't be shared at the time. Yeah. And I remember feeling at the time like, man, you can't, it felt like illegal on social media to have a different opinion than the big mainstream. You know what I mean? And it was just like a weird, and I was at the time, I guess, still trying to work out how I felt about the whole thing because there were so many things going on. And it didn't even feel like I could do that, which was weird to feel like you can't form an opinion other than this one.
Yeah.
I don't know.
And look, basically, anyway, that is actually one of the aspects of social injustice, is when you are actually not allowed to express your opinion. So that is basically called a failure of a misrepresentation, where you're not represented, you're not considered, your values are not, they're just something that people don't want to consider because it is not mainstream. So you have that. There's a failure of distribution of resources as well, which is, not giving the same access to certain people for certain services or, finances and things like that. But when it comes to that, your specific point, I see how people interact in my secular university, and they find the same sort of challenges. They find that, all of a sudden now some people can speak, but other people can't. And if your opinion is contrary to the dominant group, which I will tell you all right now, Christianity is becoming the inferior group. We are not we're not being represented as the dominant as we have for many generations. Yeah. And as a result, anything that may be contrary to what is the new norm is going to come about with, some discrimination, marginalization, and all those things that we are trying to stand against for is going to be experienced by Christians because of the shift in the culture so much that is very different to what we see as Christians and what we believe as Christians. So I think it's going to become more popular, or it's going to be definitely common that, people aren't going to be able to express certain belief systems or even values because of the fact that it is contrary to the flow of where the culture is going. So,
I don't like the idea. I mean, I don't like the idea of Christianity's voice in culture not being heard, but I would want to share that and say I think all religions' voices should be heard in a culture. Even if I don't agree with them, I think it should be something that is valued in the way our culture is stitched together. And so if it's happening to us, I don't want it happening to anybody. I don't want a Muslim to feel like they can't share their views or whatever. I think we all should be able to at least share, and it should be okay to people be like, yeah, okay, I don't agree with that because I don't share the religion or that same worldview, but at least you can share it. I don't know, which is challenging.
And I see that our lecturers throughout because the discussions get heated. You think Christian conversations get heated? You should see them with like people who just like, I'm going to tell you how it is, and I don't care to put a filter or put a Christ-likeness to what I'm saying. Yep. I've been in those discussions. We've had people literally walk out of lectures, like online walk out. They just leave the session. Because they were just like, I'm not putting up with that type of behavior. I'm not putting up with those types of comments. And there just is definitely, it happens. So it's not just within our church context that people just can't have those difficult conversations. But I do see that the lectures are always emphasizing, and especially for us as social workers, because whatever my worldview is, whatever my perspective is, when I am working with a client, I can't be so insensitive and so narrow-minded that because you don't believe in my God and you don't see morals and living and stuff the way that I see it, then we're going to clash. So it's called cultural humility. It's understanding your culture, understanding your belief and your worldview, not necessarily agreeing with it, but understanding that every decision that you make will be filtered through that. And that doesn't mean that it's right or wrong, but rather it just means, hey, you're always going to see things very different to how I see it. And I'm willing to understand that that is your culture, that is your identity, that is your belief system. And I think within the church, as I see that and as I try to apply that, I think that's where we're at, where we're trying to understand that people are always going to have different doctrinal views to us. But can we still just focus on the few things that we do have in common, that we believe in the gospel, that we believe in the work of Jesus Christ, and that, you know, for many of us, we believe that we're going to heaven and that Jesus is going to come and take us home. So, it's been really interesting, and just being able to really filter it through Christianity. I've just learned so much. And I look at the Bible and I just see, and especially through the life of Jesus, like he was such a social justice advocate. He was there for the people who would be marginalized, discriminated, exploited, that they were powerless. He's just constantly doing a work to try and fix the impact that sin has had on our world. And I think, God continues to call each one of us to be practical in that as well.
Wow, that's cool.
What's your take on the whole, you know, there seems to be this whole dichotomy between like the systemic effects of whatever it is, oppression or, versus this idea of personal responsibility. It seems to be a more of a liberal mindset versus a more conservative mindset. And I've been really challenged on this recently because, look, I used to be a huge Jordan Peterson fan, and I'm not a fan anymore. I still appreciate a lot of what he has to say. But one of the things that he has really emphasized, and I used to fully and like totally live my life by, is this whole idea of personal responsibility. Of there is nothing you cannot achieve if you don't clean your room, you know, get your life together, make the right choices, make the right healthy choices, and, you know, be a whole person. The reason that has been challenged is especially seeing sort of many of the things that are happening in the US right now, how systems of oppression are really have disadvantaged different people groups, especially African American people groups, for decades. Absolute, you know, even post, Lincoln sort of era, freeing the slaves, etc. Even post segregation, how certain people groups have been incredibly disadvantaged on a systemic level, has made me stop and go, okay, if it's happening there, then it's happening everywhere. And maybe I'm just blind to this idea. I know that's a very long-winded way to ask that question, but I'm just, this is where I'm coming from, going, maybe pulling myself up by my bootstraps is fine for me, but it may not be fine for everybody. So where do you see those two ideas sort of intersecting? Can they live together, or are they just diametrically opposed to each other?
I'm going to say that I agree with both. And the only reason why I say that is because we have enough experiences, we have enough examples of where people have been able to overcome crazy amounts of adversity, crazy amounts of things that we would be like, how can you be here today and, you know, still be functioning like a normal human being, paying your bills, going to work, having a family. So I think it is possible, but we need to understand, I feel that for people who have stepped out and been able to achieve and accomplish all those things, I think they deserve 2 gold medals because of the fact, and it comes down to equity, which is most commonly known as equality, but equality and equity are 2 very different things. But when someone from a disadvantaged area is able to succumb and overcome so many things that were against them and to still achieve what a normal person, as in, you know, someone who hasn't had all those disadvantages, then they honestly have worked a lot more to be able to get to the place where maybe the rest of society would normally be. When it comes to systemic systems of oppression, I think that they are there. They existed. We see it through the pages of the Bible. The Jews were very, very harsh on setting up oppressive systems that were basically disqualifying anyone to salvation. And yes, did people push back against that? Yeah, we have the Protestant movement, we have the early church. So there are definitely examples where people were able to bypass all those, you know, lies and systems and, you know, all the power structures. But it would take a lot more. They were persecuted because they decided to go against the religious system at that time. And I think that the systemic oppression that is seen within our culture is very real, and they are fortified structures. And for people to be able to come out of that, it's not impossible, but it takes a lot. It takes a lot, and not everyone can do that. I have worked with some people with mental health issues. I have seen people that, you know, you could say they had a really easy life, but something happened and they weren't able to get past that. And that was not because of systemic oppression. That was because in themselves, they just weren't able to have that. That's why we have support services for people when they have experienced certain trauma. They need support. But then another person who was raped, who was violated, who was molested can come out and still have like a normal life and be able to, you know, switch off all that trauma and still live a normal life. But someone else who experienced similar situations needs support workers and they're not able to. So I think we have to look at it on the individual aspect, which is, again, so when we go like to functionalist theory, which is basically that we all have to function and we need these hierarchies and society can only function if we have like a president and, you know, someone that collects our rubbish. We need those high systems and low systems. Functionalism just looks at the broad picture, just says everyone should be able to and everyone should be okay, where we need to look at the personal impact that all these systems have on people. Yeah, we can say, you know, but I grew up in a house and, you know, my parents were split up and, you know, I had an alcoholic parent and look at me today. That's fine. Like you have worked real hard and you have earned everything that you have. But there are some people who don't have that same grit. They don't have that same resilience towards things like that. And as a result, we have to see that, you know, it doesn't mean that it negates the impact of those things, but rather you are an exception to the case. And I guess that's just the way that we have to look at any of those systems. They're there and they have had detrimental impacts on generations. But yes, there are definitely people who have been able to pull themselves out of that and be like, you know what, I'm not going to let that affect me. I'm not going to let that be my story and my kid's story.
Yeah, that's cool. I think it's I like that answer that it's not necessarily either or, but it is both. And because I think I'm the same. I've seen people who live their whole life just blaming the system and never taking personal responsibility, and you're like, well, come on, like. But then there's other people who genuinely do their best and they make their best, but honestly, they were kind of dealt a bad hand and it was really hard to get out of it, but they worked with what they could. Yeah. So it's a complicated world. I don't know. This stuff's so complicated. So yeah, I agree.
Yeah. And I must say, I think just as I'm working more and more with like social workers and in the academic area, I just see so much of, we have all these services. We have so many things in place to help like Indigenous communities. Why? Because they have been damaged so much more than everyone else. Now, there's alcohol prevention for everyone else. There's all these other services for everyone else. But there is an intentional desire to provide those services for Indigenous communities because they have experienced a lot more trauma. And I don't think we who have not experienced that or who have not lived through that really understand what it's like. I remember I had a friend, she was working in Burke out in Outback, Australia. And I remember going there and she had told me what it's like to sort of work in that area with Indigenous like kids and stuff. And I went out there and I must tell you, I came out of that and I just understood how hard it is to be able to come out of that, to be better than that, to be better than alcoholic parents who have experienced molestation, have experienced domestic violence, to a generation to be stereotyped with the trauma that it has had. And then for you to be the exception to the case takes a lot. And for a little kid, some of the biggest developmental stages in a lifespan are in those childhood years. For a child to make the determined choice to say, I'm not going to be like that when they're 6 and 7, in order to change the path and the direction that their life is just expected to follow, takes a huge amount of awareness. And by the time they're, in their like childhood years to early adolescence and youth and all that, if you haven't made a choice like when you were 10 that you weren't going to have this, it's so much harder to be able to make a decision later on and to expect their life to be totally different. Yeah. It's really difficult. And psychologically, in terms of psychosocial and psychodynamic perspectives, it's extremely hard.
Yeah, that's very convicting. One last question from me. As a follower of Jesus, what is our sociological, what's our responsibility from a gospel point of view as an everyday Christian? This thing is often so politicized; it becomes a left versus right issue. We can blame so many things on why oppression and all this stuff exists. But on a very basic level, what is the responsibility, perhaps unique to followers of Jesus, that we have to make an impact in our world, in this space?
Mm-hmm. So I will always refer to Micah 6 and verse 8, where it says that God has shown man what is good, and it is to do what the Lord has required, which was to act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with God. And I think they are the three principles that God has called each one of us. When we look at the ministry of Jesus, he came to heal the brokenhearted, to set the captives free, and to liberate those that were oppressed. Now, however I see that filter, whatever awareness God has given me of those particular aspects, God is calling me to help those that are brokenhearted. Everyone that is suffering from the impact of sin in the form of oppression and in the form of discrimination and marginalization and powerlessness and violence and all those things, God is calling me to be very active in the fact that I can, with my one-on-one interactions with people, help to bring an awareness of how that is not what God wanted for his children. That is not what God wanted for his creation. And within our social work structures, there are people who work within policies, and there are people who work one-on-one with victims of social injustice. And I think we have to see where God has called us. Has he called us to work within policies and trying to change, those structures within our churches, within our communities? Or is he calling each one of us to individually work one-on-one when we see someone that is suffering from oppression, that is struggling through the fact that society is not cheering them on? Society has set up things that have made life a lot harder for them. I know for myself, coming to Australia, I guess, as an immigrant, there were a lot of things that I had to fight against. There are a lot of things that have impacted me from an early age. My dad knew English really well, but they worked 3 jobs. My dad worked as a mechanic and then did 2 night jobs in the evening with my mum. My mum didn't know English. So there are things about my English today that aren't the best because my parents came when I was 6, because they weren't able to correct me and say, no, sweetie, that's not how you pronounce this, or Catalina, that's not how you spell something. I didn't have that. And then I came to a school where I didn't even understand the English. So I'm like trying to learn English while trying to learn, basic things that we need for education. So I've had to go through certain things that people don't always look at. But at the same time, I can say that I am in a first world country thanks to the sacrifice that my parents made, that they were willing to do what they did as immigrants and come to a country because ultimately they wanted a better future for myself. And I think that is the role that we are all called for. There are things that we can actively do to make better the life of someone who is suffering and has not the abundant life that we profess that God wants to give each one of us. So, yeah, be a policymaker or be a one-on-one person that just is active about trying to change those systems that we know are not from God and that are harming humanity.
Yeah, I like that. I guess it's important to stay informed is a good thing to like what's actually happening, because a lot of us, I think, just go through the flow of the systems and policies without actually actively thinking, hey, is this like what God would want for, I don't know, our community or our country or whatever, which is a hard question to ask, but you know what I mean? Like, is it actually benefiting? And it's pretty difficult. Are there ways that you can wrestle with that? I don't know if you know much about policies and all that, but
yeah, I don't really get much into politics, but I know that there is, even within our course, like a lot of our lecturers are really emphasizing just to take care of yourself, because sometimes it can get very overwhelming when you look at just how messed up the world is and how far it is from God's ideal. And then to see our part in that and how we have helped those structures to come about, or how we actually benefit from those structures. So then it means that I have to lose something. So there's a lot of us just, taking care of ourselves and how we look at all of those, because it can be very overwhelming. But at the same time, I think some things can be just out of our reach in terms of the political space. Some things may seem completely out of our reach, but we can help. We can either help support those systems, or we can push back on them by the way that we interact, by the way that we express ourselves, by the way that, we express our opinions, or the way that we can come about bringing compassion on those particular types of people or groups that are experiencing the oppression. So, I guess it's a little varied, and I don't think there is a correct answer that is just going to fix all the problems. But, just keep asking God to just give you compassion. And as you gain compassion, you will see things through a different lens.
Yeah, no, I think that's good. I think that's a good place to land it, actually. Yeah, just that prayer for compassion and to constantly grow in that. I like that. Thank you. Convicting for me as well. So, Jesse, do you have any more thoughts you want to share?
No, I'm good. I'm just, I'm sitting in this, and it's good.
Yeah, this is great. Hey, Kat, was there anything else you wanted to share before we wrap up?
No, I think that's it.
Happy?
Thanks so much for your time.
It was awesome to have you. We've been wanting to have you for a while. We were just kind of waiting for the right moment. So I'm glad the right moment is upon us, and we're here and we've done it. It's been great. So thank you so much for sharing your wisdom. And hey, I know we talked about it at the beginning, and there's a number of ways people can follow stuff that you're doing. But where would you want to direct people to? If people want to connect to you about some of the ideas that you shared, or maybe go a bit deeper with this, what's the way to do it?
Probably my personal Facebook is where I tend to put everything on. So you'll get the Connected stuff, the podcast stuff on there. You'll get the SDA Insider stuff on there, and my TikTok. So it's Catalina Arevalo. Maybe find me. I'm friends with Josh and Jesse, so if you go on there and stalk their page, you'll be able to find me.
Yeah, definitely. Awesome. And hey, we'd love to hear from all of you guys. So if you had any thoughts on this episode, there are lots of things to think about from this episode. So we'd love to hear your thoughts. So make sure you get in contact with us and share. Maybe we'll have to get Kat on to talk further about these ideas, depending on what you guys talk about. So we'd love to hear from you. So make sure you share with us.
And to find everything Burn the Haystack, of course, you can go to burnthehaystack.org. You can find everything there that you need. And if this is the first time that you've listened to the podcast, go and give Kat's podcast a listen to. Go and subscribe to her as well, but also subscribe to us. So just subscribe to everybody. Okay, all right. We're just helping everybody out here.
Share the love around like that.
Share the love. And leave a rating or review. That really helps us to reach more and more people. So thank you for that.
Absolutely. All right. We love you guys. Stay awesome. Stay compassionate. That is Josh, Jesse, and Kat out.
Thank you.